I know who Jack the Ripper was. And I know because I died by his hands. For 3 years, I woke up screaming every single night, not from random nightmares, but from the actual memories of being murdered in 1888. I felt the cold hands around my throat. I saw his face. I knew his name. And here's what's going to terrify you. The police almost caught him, but he escaped, lived a long, peaceful life in America, and died surrounded by his family, never facing justice for what he did. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a graphic designer from Seattle, and I have no explanation for how I accessed the memories of Catherine Eddowes, Jack the Ripper's fourth victim, murdered in Mitre Square on September 30th, 1888. But I did, and what I discovered changed everything we thought we knew about history's most infamous unsolved case. Every night for 3 years, the same nightmare. Running through cobblestone streets, my long Victorian skirt catching on my ankles, gas lamps flickering, heavy footsteps echoing behind me. I could smell the Thames River, taste the coal smoke choking the air, feel terror squeezing my chest like a vice. And every single night, just as those cold hands wrapped around my throat, I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, unable to breathe. The first thing I did, I Googled myself. Or rather, I Googled the name that kept screaming in my head every night. Catherine Eddowes. What I found made me physically sick. She was real. Jack the Ripper's fourth victim. Murdered September 30th, 1888. And every detail in my nightmares, details I'd never studied, never even heard of, matched the historical records perfectly. The cobblestones, Mitre Square, the gas lamps, even the piece of her apron the killer took, a detail buried in police reports I'd never read. But here's where it gets insane. My nightmares showed me something that wasn't in any history book. A man with a scar above his eyebrow, watching her, stalking her. And when I finally found that exact same detail buried in a police statement that had been ignored for 130 years, I realized something terrifying. These weren't nightmares. These were memories. Real memories. From 1888. I tried everything to make them stop. Sleep medication, Ambien, Trazodone, melatonin in doses that should have knocked me unconscious. Nothing worked. I'd still wake up at 3:47 a.m. every single night, throat raw from screaming, heart hammering like I'd run for my life. Because in the dream, I had run for my life. Therapy didn't help. Dr. Rebecca Chen was patient, kind, professional. Anxiety manifesting as vivid dreams, she said. PTSD from something in your past. But I hadn't experienced trauma. My childhood was normal. My life was boring. I designed user interfaces for a tech company, for God's sake. There was no reason for me to wake up every night smelling coal smoke and Thames River water, feeling cobblestones under my feet, tasting the metallic fear of knowing I was being hunted. I moved apartments. New building, new neighborhood, new mattress, new everything. The nightmares followed me. My therapist said, "Write it down. Track the details." So I did. And that's when things got worse, because the details became sharper, more specific. The cobblestones weren't just wet. They had a specific pattern. Smaller stones near the buildings, larger ones in the center of the street, all uneven from centuries of cartwheels. The street wasn't just any street. It was Mitre Square, and I could read the faded white paint on the building corner, Mitre Square EC3. The gas lamps had a particular design, ornate iron posts with glass panels, some cracked, creating uneven light patterns. I could describe the exact sound they made when wind rattled the metal fixtures. A hollow, tinny sound that mixed with the distant Thames foghorns. And that name, Catherine Eddowes. It didn't just feel familiar. It felt like my name. More real than Sarah Mitchell had ever felt. When I heard Catherine in my head, I answered. When I saw her reflection in my nightmares, it was my face looking back. I started testing myself before researching, writing down details, sealing them in envelopes, then looking them up later to see if I was right. I described a specific brown dress with patches sewn on the sleeves, rough wool, scratchy against skin, patches in a darker brown that didn't quite match. I found a historical description of Catherine's clothing the night she died. Brown dress with darker patches on the sleeves. I described boots with holes in the left sole, water seeping in with every step, making her left foot perpetually cold and damp. Historical records confirmed Catherine's left boot had a hole in the sole. I described the weight of a thin shawl, inadequate against autumn cold, with a specific frayed edge on the right corner. A photograph from the crime scene showed that exact detail. Every single time. I was right. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't random historical knowledge absorbed from documentaries. This was something else. Something impossible. And then the nightmares showed me him, the man who killed me. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination. Some random historical details my brain was piecing together from movies I didn't remember watching, books I'd skimmed years ago. But then, I started testing myself. Rigorously. Scientifically. I'd write down specific details in my journal, seal the pages with tape, and date them, then research later to verify. I was determined to prove to myself, one way or another, whether this was real or delusion. Test 1. I described a specific brown dress with patches on the sleeves. Not just a brown dress. I drew it. The exact placement of the patches. Darker brown fabric that didn't quite match. 1 patch on the left sleeve, 2 on the right. Rough wool that scratched against skin, especially around the collar. Then I searched historical records. Found a police inventory from the night of Catherine's death. Brown woolen dress with 3 patches, darker material, 2 right sleeve, 1 left. Coarse fabric, worn condition. Exact match. Test 2. The boots. I could feel them in my nightmares. Worn leather, holes in the sole. But which foot? Left. Specifically, the left boot had a hole that let in water with every step, making that foot perpetually cold and damp. I drew a diagram showing where the hole was, near the ball of the foot, about 1 inch in diameter. Historical crime scene photographs showed that exact detail. Left boot, hole in precisely that location. Test 3. The smell. This one haunted me because how do you verify a smell from 130 years ago? But I described it anyway. The Thames had a particular mix of industrial waste, sewage, and river water, but also coal smoke from thousands of chimneys mixed with something else. What I later learned was called bone boiling, from factories that processed animal carcasses. It created a specific, nauseating stench that hung over Whitechapel. I found historical accounts, including from journalists who'd visited the area in 1888. Jack London's People of the Abyss described that exact smell combination years later when the factories were still operating. Test 4. The gas lamps. I described their design. Ornate iron posts, about 8 feet tall, with glass panels in 4 sides. Some of the glass was cracked, creating uneven light patterns. They made a specific sound when wind hit them, a hollow, tinny rattle as the metal fixtures knocked together. Found photographs from the period. Those exact lamp designs. Found a memoir from someone who grew up in Whitechapel describing the rattling of the gas lamp fixtures on windy nights. Every single time, the details matched. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't constructed from half-remembered documentaries or random historical osmosis. I was remembering actual, specific, verifiable details that I had no rational way of knowing. And that's when I stopped trying to rationalize it and started trying to understand what it meant. Because if these memories were real, if I was somehow accessing Catherine Eddowes' actual experiences from 1888, then the man with the scar was real too. And he needed to be found. Catherine Eddowes was real. She wasn't a figment of my imagination or a character I'd invented. She was an actual person who lived and died in Victorian London. And the way she died, the horror of it froze me to my chair as I read the historical accounts. Catherine Eddowes was the 4th victim of Jack the Ripper, murdered in Mitre Square on September 30th, 1888. The details in my nightmares matched historical records with horrifying accuracy. The location, Mitre Square in Whitechapel. The date, late September 1888. Even small, specific details like the piece of her apron that the killer took. Details that weren't in the general summaries but buried in police reports and witness statements. Details I couldn't possibly have known. I sat at my computer as dawn broke over Seattle, reading everything I could find. My hands shook as I scrolled through page after page. Catherine had been 46 years old when she died. She'd lived a hard life, marked by poverty and struggle. She'd had children, lost children. She'd loved a man named John Kelly, lived with him in common-law marriage despite their desperate circumstances. She'd worked when she could, struggled when she couldn't, survived in the brutal poverty of London's East End until that terrible night when she couldn't survive anymore. And I knew all of this. Not from reading it. I knew it before I read it. The reading just confirmed what I already somehow understood in my bones. I became obsessed. I took time off work, telling my boss I was dealing with a family emergency. In a way, I was just not a family from this lifetime. I read everything I could find about the Ripper murders, about Catherine's life, about Whitechapel in 1888. I ordered books from Amazon, checked out volumes from the library, joined online forums dedicated to Ripper research. And the more I learned, the more my nightmares expanded, filling in gaps I didn't know existed. I started seeing Catherine's life before that terrible night. I felt her struggles, the bone-deep exhaustion of poverty. I experienced her brief moments of joy, a warm meal, a kind word from John Kelly, the rare days when work was available and she could earn a few pennies. I felt her love for her children, even though they'd been taken from her by circumstance and poverty. I experienced her resilience, her determination to survive in a world that gave women like her almost no chance. But something in my nightmares didn't match the historical record, and that discrepancy consumed me. He wore a dark coat, well-made, expensive wool, the kind a professional would wear. But his eyes were wrong, cold, analytical, clinical. The way a surgeon looks at a body on an operating table, not a person on the street. And above his left eyebrow, cutting through the pale skin, a distinctive scar, pale raised tissue, about 1 inch long, catching the gas lamplight whenever he turned his head. He wasn't attacking in these visions. He was worse than that. He was patient, methodical, professional, a predator who understood that the hunt was as important as the kill. That control and power came from selecting, stalking, studying your prey before the final moment, watching Catherine for days before he struck, following her through the streets with the same 20-pace distance like he was conducting a clinical experiment, making careful notes in his leather notebook about her patterns, her habits, where she went, who she spoke to, when she was vulnerable. And Catherine knew. She felt it. In my nightmares, I experienced her growing terror, the way her stomach clenched when she saw him again, the way she'd start walking faster, heart pounding, praying he wouldn't follow. But he always did. She told John Kelly, her partner, "There's a man with cold eyes watching me. Scar over his eyebrow. Something's wrong about him. Something evil. But in 1888, Whitechapel, what could a poor woman do?" The police didn't listen to women like her. Prostitutes, homeless women, drunks. They had no credibility, no voice, no protection. She couldn't leave. She had nowhere to go, no money, no options. She could only try to be careful. Try to stay with John. Try to survive. She didn't. Now here's the problem. I spent weeks reading everything about the Ripper case. Every book, from academic texts to sensationalist theories. Every documentary, BBC specials, true crime shows, historical analyses. Every researcher's pet theory. Thousands of pages analyzed by experts for over 130 years. Not one of them mentioned a man with a scar above his eyebrow. Not one. Which meant either I was completely losing my mind, experiencing a psychotic break, creating elaborate historical fantasies, or I was seeing something real that history had forgotten, something that had been there all along, buried in archives nobody had looked at in decades. So I went deeper, way deeper. I contacted the London Metropolitan Archives, the British Library, the National Archives at Kew. I searched for digitized police records, original witness statements, anything from the actual 1888 investigation. Victorian handwriting is brutal. Faded brown ink on yellowed paper. Abbreviations and police, shorthand from 130 years ago. My eyes burned from staring at scanned documents on my laptop screen at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I stopped sleeping, not because of nightmares, but because I was obsessed. My boss called. "Sarah, you've used all your sick days. If you don't come back to work, we'll have to let you go." I didn't care. This was more important than user interface design. This was more important than my career. A woman had been murdered, and somehow, impossibly, she was using me to tell her story. I read hundreds of witness statements. Most were useless. People claiming to have seen suspicious men who turned out to be local drunks or confused testimony, mixing up dates and locations. Ripperologists had analyzed them endlessly, finding nothing conclusive. But then, at 4:18 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, buried in a statement that had been filed and forgotten, I found it. Mary Ann Connolly, also known as Pearly Poll. Witness statement dated October 2nd, 1888, 2 days after Catherine's murder. Most of her statement was about something else, providing an alibi for a friend who'd been questioned. Random Victorian street drama, irrelevant to the murders. The kind of statement researchers would skim and dismiss. But there, in the middle of page 2, almost as an afterthought, I seen Catherine 2 days before, Thursday it was, talking to a man near Flower and Dean Street. Didn't think nothing of it at the time, but he had a marked face, bearing a scar over the left eye. Dressed better than most round here. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I took a screenshot, saved it 3 times to different cloud services, printed it. I was terrified it would disappear, that I'd imagined it, that I'd wake up and find out this was just another dream. But it was real. This was real. A witness from 1888 had seen Catherine with a man matching my description, a man nobody had paid attention to because he didn't fit the prevailing theories. The experts were looking for frenzied butchers and mad aristocrats, not patient stalkers with surgical training who spent days selecting their victims. But Catherine had seen him. She'd known. And Mary Ann Connolly had witnessed it, testified to it, and been ignored for 130 years. Until now. I needed help. Professional help from someone who wouldn't immediately dismiss me as insane. I contacted Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, one of the world's leading experts on the Ripper case. She'd published dozens of papers, worked with Scotland Yard's historical archives, consulted on documentaries. If anyone would know whether this mattered, it was her. I sent her an email at 5 a.m. Tried to sound rational despite explaining that I was having memories of being murdered in 1888. Attached the screenshot of Mary Ann Connolly's statement. Attached my own notes describing the man with the scar. Notes I'd written and dated before finding the witness statement, proving I'd described him first. Then I waited. 3 days. 3 days of obsessively checking my email every 10 minutes. 3 days of wondering if she'd even respond, or if my message had gone straight to her spam folder, along with all the other crazy people who claimed psychic connections to famous murders. On day 3, late at night in Seattle, early morning in London, I got a response. 2 sentences. Can you describe him more specifically? This may be important. My heart nearly stopped. We set up a video call for the next day. I barely slept, rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd explain without sounding completely insane. Failed completely at that goal. Dr. Hartwell appeared on my screen. Late 50s, sharp eyes, graying hair pulled back, walls lined with books behind her. She looked at me with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. "Tell me everything about the man in your nightmares," she said. No pleasantries. No skepticism. Just focused attention. So I told her. Everything. The way he walked with a slight limp, favoring his right leg like an old injury, still bothered him. His boots. Quality leather, well made, the kind that cost money, but worn and dirty like he'd been walking rough streets for days. Gentleman's boots on a man doing ungentlemanly things. The silver watch chain, visible under his coat. A small detail, but one I'd seen clearly. Expensive, ornate, with a small fob that caught the gas lamp light. The kind of thing a doctor or surgeon might own. The way his fingers drummed against his thigh when he watched. A nervous habit. Thumb, index, middle, ring, pinky, over and over. Like he was counting something. Marking time. Waiting for the perfect moment. But most of all, his eyes. Cold. Analytical. The way a scientist looks at a specimen through a microscope. No emotion. No humanity. Just clinical observation and calculation. I described how Catherine first noticed him outside the 10 Bells pub, sketching in a leather notebook. How she saw him again near Flower and Dean Street. How he followed her through Spitalfields Market, always maintaining the same distance, like he was conducting an experiment. Dr. Hartwell was silent. For so long I thought my internet had frozen. Then she leaned forward, her face filling my screen. "You need to come to London. I need to show you something that's never been published. Something that's been sitting in an archive box for over a century, seen by maybe 5 people total." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Ms. Mitchell, what you're describing matches unpublished notes from Inspector Aberline's private papers. Papers his family only donated 5 years ago. Papers I've been cataloging personally. There's no way you could have seen them. They've never been online, never been photographed for public access, never been mentioned in any published work." My vision tunneled. The room spun. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to come to London, now." I booked a flight that night, used my credit card, maxed it out, didn't care. Told my boss I had a family emergency, which was technically true if you counted past life family emergencies. He told me not to bother coming back. I told him I wouldn't. 2 weeks later, the soonest I could get a flight and arrange everything, I was on a plane to Heathrow. 11 hours of turbulence and anxiety. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except what Dr. Hartwell was going to show me. What if it proved I was right? What if there was actual historical evidence matching my impossible memories? What did that mean about consciousness, about death, about reality itself? What if it proved I was wrong? What if I'd quit my job, destroyed my savings, and flown across an ocean for nothing? What if I really was just losing my mind? London was gray and drizzling when I arrived. The taxi driver took me through streets that felt both completely alien and disturbingly familiar. Modern London, cars, buses, contemporary buildings, but underneath I could feel the bones of the old city, Victorian buildings still standing between the glass towers. Street names I recognized from my nightmares. The Thames, still flowing, still smelling like industry and history. We passed close to Whitechapel. My skin erupted in goosebumps. Nausea hit me so hard I almost asked the driver to pull over. I could feel it, the weight of what happened there. Catherine's fear. Her death. 130 years hadn't erased it. Dr. Hartwell met me at the London Metropolitan Archives. Modern building, all glass and steel, housing centuries of history. She was shorter than she'd appeared on video, but her presence was commanding. She shook my hand, assessed me with those sharp eyes, then led me through security without small talk. We passed reading rooms where researchers bent over old documents, taking notes by hand. No pens allowed near the original materials, only pencils. The smell hit me. Old paper, leather, the particular mustiness of aged documents. It smelled like memory itself. Dr. Hartwell led me to a private research room. Climate-controlled. White gloves laid out on the table. And a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, already opened to a specific page. Inspector Frederick Aberline's private case notes, she said quietly. not his official reports. Those are public record. These are his personal observations. Theories he couldn't prove, suspects he couldn't pursue, things that troubled him but never made it into official channels. I put on the white gloves. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get them on. Dr. Hartwell turned the journal so I could see it clearly. And there, on a page dated October 15th, 1888, 15 days after Catherine's murder, was a sketch. A man's face, rendered in careful pencil strokes. Strong jaw, deep-set eyes, and above the left eyebrow, a distinctive scar. It was him, the man from my nightmares, the man who'd haunted me for 3 years, the man who'd stalked Catherine through Victorian streets, drawn by the actual detective who'd investigated the murders 130 years ago. I couldn't breathe. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. Read what he wrote below, Dr. Hartwell said softly. I focused on Aberline's handwriting. Victorian script, faded ink, but still legible. Person of interest observed near multiple victims in days preceding their deaths. Well-dressed, despite appearing to frequent rough areas. Medical training suspected based on witness who saw him examining anatomical texts at London Hospital reading room. Silver watch chain noted by 3 separate witnesses. Walks with slight limp, favoring right leg. When approached for questioning, became evasive and departed quickly. Unable to establish concrete connection to murders. Lost trail after November 9th. Believe suspect may have fled jurisdiction to avoid further scrutiny. Every detail, every single detail from my nightmares was there. The limp, the watch chain, the medical connection, the evasiveness, the disappearance in November. There's more, Dr. Hartwell said. She pulled out another document. A ship's passenger manifest, also from Aberline's private papers. November 12th, 1888. Ship departing London for Boston. One name circled in faded red pencil, Dr. Marcus Ashford. Next to it, in Aberline's handwriting, fled, lost trail, unable to pursue. And below that, a note that made my blood run cold. Strongly suspect this individual responsible for at least 3 deaths, possibly all 5. Medical knowledge evident in precision of attacks. Stalking behavior reported by acquaintances of Eddowes and Chapman. No concrete evidence to justify formal charges. Subject departed England before investigation could proceed. Case remains open. Aberline had known. He'd suspected the right man. He'd identified the stalking behavior. He'd connected the medical training to the precision of the murders. He'd found the trail leading to the ship manifest. But he couldn't prove it. Couldn't pursue across the Atlantic. Couldn't get formal charges. So Marcus Ashford sailed to America, changed his name slightly, and disappeared into a new life, while Aberline spent the rest of his career haunted by the one who got away. How did you know? Dr. Hartwell asked me, her voice almost a whisper. How could you possibly describe a man from unpublished notes that had been sitting in this archive, unseen, for over a century? I had no answer, no explanation, just impossible truth. Over the next week, Dr. Hartwell and I worked together, reconstructing Marcus Ashford's life from fragments of history. We found his employment records at London Hospital. Hired as a surgeon's assistant in January 1887, by all accounts, skilled, precise, knowledgeable. But the other staff found him unsettling. Cold manner, one supervisor wrote. Excellent technical skills, but poor bedside manner. Patient report feeling uncomfortable in his presence. The hospital dismissed him in August 1888. The official reason: conduct unbecoming of a medical professional. But we found an internal memo that was more specific. Dr. Ashford discovered making unauthorized sketches of female patients during examinations. When confronted, became defensive and threatening. Dismissal recommended immediately. 3 weeks later, the Ripper murders began. We traced his lodging address. 23 Golston Street. I looked it up on a modern map. It was demolished decades ago, now a parking lot. But in 1888, it was a boarding house within walking distance of every single murder site. Less than half a mile from Mitre Square. We found records of his medical training. Edinburgh Medical School, graduated 1883, specialized in surgical techniques. His thesis was on precision in abdominal surgery. Ironically, exactly the kind of knowledge evident in the Ripper's attacks. Then we followed him across the Atlantic. Ship passenger manifest. Marcus Ashford, age 32, occupation listed as physician, departed London November 12, 1888, arrived Boston December 3, 1888. He settled in a small town in Massachusetts called Ashmont, and I couldn't help but wonder if he chose it because the name was so close to his own. Changed his professional name to M.A. Ashton. Marcus Ashford became M.A. Ashton, subtle, clever, easy to explain as a preference or professional abbreviation. He established a medical practice within 6 months. The local newspaper from 1889 had an announcement. Dr. M.A. Ashton, formerly of London, has opened a practice specializing in general medicine and minor surgery. Patients welcome. He married in 1890. Local woman Sarah Whitmore from a respectable family. They had 3 children, 2 boys, 1 girl. The family photographs we found in Historical Society archives showed a stern-looking man with a wife and children. Respectable, normal, utterly unremarkable. He became a pillar of the community. Delivered babies, treated illnesses, served on the town council. The 1920 census listed him as physician, highly regarded. When he died in 1923 at age 67, his obituary praised his dedicated service to the community for over 3 decades. Nobody suspected. Nobody questioned. Dr. Ashton was respectable, established, trusted. And here's the thing that haunts me. The murders stopped. Completely. The Ripper's last generally accepted killing was Mary Jane Kelly on November 9, 1888. 3 days later, Marcus Ashford boarded a ship to America. And London never saw another murder matching the Ripper's pattern. Coincidence? Maybe. But Aberline didn't think so. His notes make it clear he believed Ashford was responsible, believed he'd fled before formal charges could be brought, believed the right man had escaped. And Catherine's memories, my memories, confirmed it. Because my nightmares showed me more than just the stalking and the murder. They showed me Ashford's face in those final moments. The cold satisfaction in his eyes as Catherine recognized him, understood what was about to happen. He'd wanted her to know, wanted her to understand she'd been selected, hunted, defeated. That was part of it for him, not just the killing, but the power, the control, the godlike feeling of choosing who lived and who died. And he got away with it. Lived 35 more years, died peacefully. His children probably remembered him fondly. His patients probably mourned him. His community probably thought he was a good man. But Catherine remembered the truth. And somehow, across 130 years and the barrier of death itself, she made sure I remembered it too. Dr. Hartwell and I wrote everything up. We were careful. We acknowledged the unusual nature of the evidence. We didn't claim to have definitively solved the case. We couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that Marcus Ashford was Jack the Ripper. But we presented a compelling case for him as a significant person of interest. We laid out Aberline's notes, the witness statements mentioning the man with the scar, Ashford's medical background, his dismissal from the hospital, his proximity to the murder sites, his sudden departure from London, the timing of the murder stopping, and yes, we included my account. Carefully worded, one researcher reported experiencing detailed recollections matching historical records, including descriptions of a suspect that aligned with Aberline's unpublished notes. The paper was published in the Journal of Victorian Criminal Studies. The response was explosive. Half the academic community dismissed it. Circumstantial evidence, pseudoscientific methodology. Irresponsible speculation. One reviewer called it a disgrace to serious historical research. But the other half couldn't ignore the correlations. The fact that Aberline had suspected this man. The fact that the timeline matched perfectly. The fact that we'd found real historical evidence supporting the theory. The BBC picked it up. Then The Guardian. Then international news. New suspect in Jack the Ripper case based on detectives' lost notes. They were careful not to emphasize the past life aspect that would have killed our credibility, but the historical evidence stood on its own. Ripperologists debated furiously online. Some called us fame-seeking frauds. Others said it was the most convincing new theory in decades. Documentaries were made. Podcasts discussed it. Amateur sleuths started researching Marcus Ashford's life, finding more details we'd missed. And my nightmares finally stopped. Not immediately, but gradually. The terror faded. The frequency dropped from every night to every few nights, then once a week, then rarely. The last dream I had wasn't a nightmare at all. I was standing in a field of wildflowers, somewhere in the English countryside. Sunshine, warm breeze, peace. Catherine was there, but not as the terrified woman running through dark streets. She looked younger, healthier, at peace. She turned to me and smiled. Really smiled. With warmth and gratitude. "Thank you," she said. Her voice clear, no longer choked with fear. "Thank you for listening when no one else would. Thank you for finding the truth. Thank you for making sure I wasn't just forgotten. Will you be okay now?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I can rest now. My story's been told. He's been named. That's all I needed. Justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's just about truth. About being heard. About mattering." She started to fade, dissolving into golden light. Catherine. Wait. But she was gone. Dissolved into the sunshine and wildflowers, leaving behind only warmth and the lingering sense of peace. I woke up crying. But not from fear. From relief. From gratitude. From the overwhelming sense that something profound had been completed. The nightmares never came back after that. I sleep peacefully now. Normal dreams that fade in the morning. Sometimes I don't remember dreaming at all. It's bliss. But I'm not the same person I was before. I couldn't just go back to designing user interfaces and pretending none of this happened. I went back to school. Studied forensic history, archival research, criminal investigation of cold cases. Dr. Hartwell became my mentor, then my colleague, then my friend. We've worked on 7 other Victorian cold cases since Catherine's. Each one started the same way. Someone contacted us reporting historical memories. Dreams. Visions. Impossible knowledge. Most of them were nothing. Wishful thinking, false memories, people who'd read too much and confused research with experience. But some were real. A woman in California who kept dreaming about a well in the English countryside, a child's body at the bottom. We investigated, found historical records of a missing child from 1878, searched the area she described. Construction workers found skeletal remains exactly where she said they'd be. A man in Australia who had nightmares about being wrongly convicted of murder in 1901. We traced the case. Found evidence suggesting the actual killer had been his business partner. The conviction was posthumously overturned. A teenager in Japan who described details of a Victorian woman who died in a factory fire. Details that matched a fire from 1891 that had killed 23 women. The official report said it was accidental. Her memory suggested arson to collect insurance. We found evidence supporting that theory. Each time, we follow the same process. Interview the person reporting the memories. Document everything they claim before we research. Then we investigate. We search archives, cross-reference historical records, look for independent verification. Sometimes we find nothing. The memories don't match reality, or there's not enough historical evidence to pursue. But sometimes, often enough to keep doing this, We find the truth buried in forgotten documents. We solve mysteries. We give voice to people who died unheard. We give them what Catherine got: acknowledgement that their stories matter. I don't know how this works. I've read every book on consciousness, reincarnation, collective memory, quantum theories about time. None of them fully explain it. Is it literal reincarnation? Am I actually Catherine reborn? Or is it some kind of psychic connection across time? Or is consciousness more complex than we understand, capable of accessing information in ways science hasn't discovered yet? I don't know. What I do know is this. Catherine Eddowes was murdered September 30th, 1888, by a man who stalked her, hunted her, killed her with surgical precision. She died knowing she'd been prey, died understanding her killer had escaped, died raging against the injustice of it all. For 130 years, that rage refused to be silent. And somehow, through nightmares that defied explanation, through memories that shouldn't exist, through a connection across time that I'll never fully understand, Catherine found her voice. Marcus Ashford died peacefully at 67, surrounded by family who thought he was a good man. But he wasn't. He was a killer who got away with murder, who fled justice, who lived free while his victims were forgotten. Catherine made sure he wasn't forgotten either. His name is now in the historical record as a credible suspect. His movements are documented. His connection to the crimes is being researched. He didn't get punished in life. But he won't be remembered as respectable. He'll be remembered as what he was: a probable serial killer who almost got away with history's most infamous murders. That's justice, of a sort. Not perfect, but something. Catherine saw him watching through a pub window, sketching in a notebook, his eyes lifting from the page, scanning the women in the room, measuring, selecting. She felt uneasy, but told herself it was nothing. Day 2. Outside her lodging house. Just standing there. When she looked at him, he smiled. Cold. Knowing. Day 3. Following her through the market, 20 paces behind. When she stopped, he stopped. A shadow with intent. By day 4, Catherine was terrified. There's a man, she told John. Scar over his eye. He's following me. Something's very wrong. John searched for him. But Ashford vanished whenever men appeared. He only watched when Catherine was alone. September 30th, 1888. Catherine arrested for being drunk. Released at 1 a.m. into dark streets. Walking alone, trying to reach John. Marcus Ashford stepped from the shadows near Mitre Square. In my nightmares, I felt her recognition. The ice-cold terror. The understanding that all her warnings, all her fear, hadn't been enough. She tried to run. He was faster. She tried to scream. His hand covered her mouth. She tried to fight. He had surgical precision. The last thing Catherine felt was rage. Rage that she'd known, that she'd warned, that nobody protected her. Rage that this man would get away with it. But he didn't. Not completely. 130 years later, Catherine made sure someone knew the truth. Dr. Hartwell and I published everything. Academic journals, news articles, documentaries. The response was explosive. Half dismissed us, half couldn't ignore the evidence. My nightmares stopped. Gradually, then completely. The last dream was Catherine at peace, smiling in a wildflower field. "Thank you," she said, then dissolved into light. I left graphic design, became a forensic historian. Now I work with Dr. Hartwell full-time, investigating Victorian cold cases reported through impossible memories. We've solved 7 others since Catherine, Emma from Vancouver, who dreamed of drowning in a well as a child. We found Margaret Thornton's remains from 1878, exactly where Emma said they'd be. 145-year-old mystery solved. Marcus from Texas, who felt the rope around his neck, convinced he'd been hanged for a murder he didn't commit. We found Thomas Wright's case from 1901, wrongly executed. His conviction posthumously overturned. Yuki from Japan, who remembered dying in a factory fire. We found evidence the 1891 fire that killed 23 women was arson for insurance money, not accidental as claimed. Each time, nightmares, impossible knowledge, historical verification, truth revealed. I still don't understand how it works. Reincarnation? Psychic echoes? Something about consciousness we haven't discovered? I don't know. What I know. Catherine Eddowes refused to be silenced. Marcus Ashford thought he'd escaped. He was wrong. His name is now in the record as a credible suspect. His movements documented. His crimes exposed. He won't be remembered as respectable. He'll be remembered as what he was. A killer who almost got away with it. If you're having nightmares with historical details you can't explain, write them down. Document everything before researching. You might be the voice someone's been waiting for across centuries. And if you're a soul from the past trying to speak, we're listening. Your story matters. Catherine Eddowes was murdered September 30th, 1888. But she wasn't forgotten. Her killer was named. Her story was told. The nightmares that tormented me became my calling. The woman who haunted me taught me that the past never stays buried. It just waits for someone brave enough to listen. Thank you for listening to Catherine's story. Share yours in the comments. You're not alone. The past is speaking. All we have to do is listen.